So what do you think? Let's start with CFO. What overview, what do you think the main difference is?
I'll go into a few different steps here. I think for the first part is you have all of the accounting information, the data. I'll call that under bookkeeping. That's AP, AR. It's just all of the intricate data. You need each person in their role. And so typically that's a bookkeeper would be the one person in a smaller company.
Yeah.
And then above that, when you're getting more mid-size, you'd have a controller who's assisting with that information, handling some of the more complicated elements of that, but ultimately is in charge of making sure that data is correct and delivering financial results or information. Then the CFO is above that. So it's very much the CFO requires a good middle person providing good information, which then provides people actually doing the day-to-day business.
For sure.
And so they're very interconnected, and a CFO can't do its job if the middle or the bottom piece is missing.
Yeah.
And so, but then it's like, okay, the value to the business owner, it's like, if I have a good controller, why do I need a CFO, or vice versa? If I have a good CFO, why do I need a controller? And so a good example in terms of is the CFO is the architect. And so it's designing the building and making sure that the building is going to be the correct one for the function, right? Like if I'm designing a house, is it got the number of rooms that you need? Like what is the structure? Or if you need an industrial space, it's actually an industrial building. Whereas the controller is like the site supervisor or the project supervisor.
That's a good point.
Right?
It's a great way to look at it. For me personally, controller is your main responsibility is, at the end of the day, your deliverable is accurate financial statements.
Yes.
And in order to do that, there's a lot of things that play into that. You got to make sure that you have data integrity, you have the right controls in place to capture costs, revenues, inventory. All of that needs to be in place, which is the job of the controller, as you say, the supervisor, to make sure that all of those things are happening and those costs are being captured.
Yeah.
And it all funnels into the GL, which then allows you to provide financial statements, which then provides analysis. But that, to me, is where the job stops, and then the CFO job starts.
Yes.
I've always liked the analogy. Controllers look at the past, and CFOs are responsible for the future.
100%.
It's controllers are, hey, here is the results for the last 5 years, 1 year. Here's our trends. Provide a bit of analysis. Okay, this is why it went up. This is when it's been down. But they're not making the decisions. The CFO is then responsible to take that information and make decisions and forecast into the future and do all of that.
Yes, exactly.
So I like your analogy, the supervisor versus the architect. So
to drive on and build on the looking in the past versus the future is, if you have a good controller, is you'll have good data or good information, but you won't necessarily have the story of why it's important or why it matters, or how do you actually tie these to your goals, right? And this is where, especially if an owner, if you're less accustomed to financials and the data and the numbers, you're gonna have a really hard time piecing together, okay, now what, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why sometimes with a really good controller and a business owner that doesn't know the numbers, like, great, I have these numbers, I have these goals, how do I get there?
Yeah.
And right, that's where a CFO comes in, and they say, okay, here's the base numbers that's provided by your accounting team, your controller typically who's in charge of the accounting team, right? Even backing up, your controller's in charge of your accounting team, your accounting and finance team, right? But then it's the story or the milestones and saying, this is the next best decision, that's coming from your CFO.
Yeah.
But again, is if you have a great CFO and a poor controller, you can't really actually assist, right? Like the building is like, we need to build this building. Okay, great. I'm not managing the teams, making sure people are showing up at time.
You need that foundation.
Yes, they provide a really good skill set of in the trenches with their team and making sure that information is coming through. And so you need both.
Don't you find, I always find that most companies, it's like when they put out a posting for a CFO, they're kind of looking for a controller. Like they'll send out a thing for a CFO, and then they're like, hey, we need to get our financials in order. We need accurate financials and providing analysis. And then a lot of controller posts, it's like, we just want to make sure that you know, processing AP and AR and controls are in place, and do the month end close. And I find, you know, it's almost like the controllers are like glorified bookkeepers, and the CFOs, you end up with a lot of controller type duties. You think that's accurate, or?
Yeah, I think that's happening more and more. I think that's tied like the title inflation, right? Inherently title, everyone is getting more and more inflated titles, and that's happening with bookkeepers are saying I can do controller level tasks because they see like a month end close or they're able to produce financial statements, and controllers are like, oh, I can create good financial statements and give you a little bit of analysis, like trend analysis or ratio analysis, therefore I'm a CFO.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's a lot more in depth and complicated than that. So yeah, absolutely is. I think controller is one of the hardest ones, is because controllers there's such differences even within controllers. At a really small company, you can have a controller and their compensation is in the bottom range, but they're still doing controller level tasks. But their skill set compared to like a huge public company or even a large private one is those level of control. They're not even they're two totally different people, two totally different experiences and skill sets. And so I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes into.
Yeah, super true. I know for me personally, like my title has been controller, and for like, you know, the companies are 50 million to 75 million range, and there is no CFO.
Yeah.
So whenever you have a controller and no CFO, if you're, you know, being a good controller, there's a gap of duties that aren't being done, like we were talking about. There's presenting the past numbers, but it's my job to go and look at the future as well. So you're performing those CFO duties. So and that you find that as well across many industries, is that, you know, some people just have a controller, you know, or they'll just have a CFO, and it ends up blending the roles. But there really is a distinct difference between those responsibilities. And when you get large enough and you need both, is really when you see companies grow. In order to get to that next stage, in my opinion, I'd like your thoughts, but in my opinion, it's like you need both, because you can't have your CFO preparing the numbers and doing the month end close and making sure all the processes in order. It's like there's enough strategy and need to determine what to do with our cash flow, forecasting, all of that's future related items. That you need both roles.
So this is where for me it's complicated. So I wouldn't go you need both roles all the time. Again, it's the size of your company and the goals and dreams of the owner and the business is really going to dictate this. Right. In a smaller, like 5 million or less revenue, I'm going to use revenue as a stopgap, is you wouldn't need it both for sure, right? Actually, a good bookkeeper could be enough for me to do my CFO services.
For sure.
A good bookkeeper that's closing the books, providing the financial information, and that's it. That's all I need. And then I'll go into even more of the analysis and kind of more of the base analysis. Fantastic. Likewise, so yeah, you wouldn't need a controller in that case, but when you get larger, then yeah, you would want both, because they're handling the day-to-day in the trenches. And this is really where the fractional service or the fractional CFO has kind of the strengths. And this is where I like this model versus, like, if you are, let's say 15 to 20 million and you're not like your mid-sized growth, you could get away with a good controller, or like a weaker CFO and not have both. And then the CFO is often doing a lot of controller tasks, kind of almost your first point.
Yeah.
Is it really blends, right? And that's where the terms are changing so much and that's why I like the fractional CFO model, is it's saying the model is zero controller tasks into it is the goal. Yeah. Because every time me as a CFO is doing controller tasks, I'm taking time and energy and effort away of the higher value, right? So you're paying someone top dollar as a CFO to do controller tasks. It's really low value work inherently.
Yeah.
And so that's what I find a lot, is you have really strong controllers who have a mixed role, whether 20-30% of the duties is CFO, or weaker CFOs, or just the companies of that size, where they're spending sometimes 50% of their day doing controller tasks.
Yeah.
I see that all the time.
That's the case for me. I know that, like I said, I'm responsible to basically do the CFO duties at the company, but because I'm also responsible for the controller duties, it takes so much time to do that point. Like by the time you close month end, and then you have like you got to meet with your team, make sure that they're doing their jobs and all of those different controller type duties. It's like you don't have a lot of time to look at the future, and it can actually hurt a business. And bringing in a fractional CFO, it's like, or someone to fill that gap would like can provide immense value, I find.
Yeah. Can you jump into that a little bit? Because your experience is like you're an amazing controller. You've done a lot of the experience, but like you said, you've been doing CFO tasks the whole way through.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like you're winning awards for your controller level in your group right now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of define high level, like the top 5 key tasks or deliverables for a controller?
Yeah, key tasks. For me, as a controller, you want to have a good, firm understanding of the full process from the start, from the quoting, from the customer, all the way to the items leaving. You need to understand how data flows throughout the company and make sure that data integrity is intact. Without that, you can't produce accurate financial statements, right?
Yes, you need data integrity is one.
Yeah, that's definitely one. And then the second one is, you need to have accurate financial statements. And then month-end close is another huge task for a controller, and those kind of go hand in hand. You need to make sure that everything is being captured into the financial statements accurately in order to make business decisions. And that's kind of the next part. After you've produced the financial statements, the month-end analysis at the end. I always find that I have a checklist for all of my staff in the accounting department in order to make sure that every single task is being done before we close the books. Because, I got to make sure that when I present the numbers, it's all encompassing. Cut off, accrual accounting is followed, all of that stuff. ASPE is followed, everything. So, it's very important to have those steps and that structure in place and the infrastructure. Otherwise, it's, you can't rely on the results. And then the next big deliverable is that, like I said, for ownership, you got to identify what information the owners want to look at and what information is pertinent to grow the business and provide insights for people. So, usually having PowerPoint presentation, Power BI reports, setting up all of that stuff in order to, provide insight into the business is kind of where it starts to separate you as a good controller. Because a lot of people will just be, hey, here, I finished the month-end close, here's the financial statements, the balance sheet, and, hardly ever a cash flow statement, but income statement, balance sheet are the main ones, and that's it. Right? Maybe a bit of comparatives, but you want to look at more. You got to provide information for all of the managers in the different departments as well. If I'm the procurement manager, I'm responsible for purchasing. You want to give them inventory levels, days of inventory, what inventory is slow moving, different things like that. Sales have various reports, top 5 customers, top 5 products, you got to structure every single, reports and reporting for the company as a whole. And then set up meetings to go through that. And that's how you, provide real decisions, strategy decisions for the company to help them grow. So, those are kind of the main things for the controller that's important. But like you say, then you start getting into the CFO work is after that. That's just the basis. Here's the numbers. But I think the next part is the CFO, which is huge, which is, the strategy side of things, forward looking.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of give a summary then for me. So for a fractional CFO to do their job, I'll reword that. So for Meister Strategies to be able to be effective in their fractional CFO services, I need to have a functional and capable accounting team. And so typically that's run by a controller. It could be a bookkeeper the smaller the company is. And ultimately, I need to get the data and the financials from their accounting team. And then from there, I can start interpreting it, creating a story, and then also forecasting and looking to the future. And the goal is taking, again, your dreams, goals, aspirations, where we want to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then working backwards with the numbers to insert then saying, here's the milestones that we need to hit. Here's what it will look like to be successful. And then here's also then going to the strategy side. For me, strategy is you have limited resources. It's making the best decision with those limited resources.
Yeah.
And again, it's flowing up from their accounting team, and so I really need a strong accounting team. But I'm not going in and doing the work, because as a CFO, that's not the best value.
Yeah.
There's ways that moving forward that we can talk about at a later time is where we can jump in and assist and help, but it's a separate service. It's a different skill set, and ultimately we need a strong, capable accounting team in order to best do fractional CFO services.
For sure. Yeah. Without accurate financial reports and that analysis, it's kind of hard to do the strategy side, because you don't have a lot of visibility, right? And it's kind of the job of the controller to provide that visibility.
And yeah, at the end of the day, for me, is if you don't have real numbers, you're not really providing this, the CPA, the CFO, the future looking. It's turning into guesswork,
Yeah.
right? Ultimately, it's making informed decisions, informed strategies, and that's a big part of the CFO. And the informed part comes from the information coming from the records, right? Like accurate gross profit numbers. One of the biggest ones is actual gross profits of segments or product types or specific products, and from there is knowing that information that's going to adjust your marketing, your sales price, your inventory procurement, supply chain. It's all of that is such dictated on the numbers, and ultimately the numbers have to be correct.
Yeah.
And that's the responsibility of your accounting team, which is often led by a controller.